Dr. Helen Kowalski was the teacher every student remembered decades later. For 28 years at Lincoln High School, she transformed lives. Her AP literature classes were legendary, not because they were easy, but because Helen saw every student as capable of greatness. She arrived at 6 a.m. and left at 8 p.m. She ran the after-school program, mentored new teachers, and bought books with her own money for students who couldn't afford them. Former students included senators, authors, and educators who all said the same thing. Dr. Kowalski changed my life. But Helen had one fatal flaw in the eyes of her superiors. She couldn't ignore corruption. And that would cost her everything. Frank Garrison became superintendent when Helen was 52 years old. He was charismatic and politically connected, arriving with promises of innovation and fiscal responsibility. The school board loved him. The local newspaper praised him. Helen saw through him immediately. Within months, she noticed irregularities. Technology contracts with companies delivering obsolete equipment, construction projects with inflated costs, consulting fees paid to firms that did nothing. Budget cuts eliminated essential programs while administrative salaries doubled. At a staff meeting, Helen questioned a $2 million software contract for a program that didn't work. Frank smiled coldly. Dr. Kowalski, perhaps you should focus on teaching and leave financial decisions to administrators. Helen didn't leave it alone. Helen started tracking the money. She compared budgets, followed paper trails, discovered that Frank was embezzling through fake vendors and kickback schemes. Over 3 years, she documented $12 million in suspicious transactions. Frank was stealing from children to fund his lake house, luxury cars, and Vegas business trips. Helen took her evidence to the school board. Board President Claudia Brennan thanked her for her concerns and did nothing. Claudia and Frank were political allies. They protected each other. So Helen filed a formal complaint with the state education department. That's when Frank decided to destroy her. Frank's revenge was systematic. First, isolation. He transferred Helen's closest colleagues to different schools, denied her classroom supply requests, removed her from committees, canceled the after-school program she'd run for 15 years, citing budget constraints, while giving himself a $40,000 raise. Then fabrication. Jessica Talbot, a young teacher hungry for advancement, approached Frank with concerns about Helen. With Frank's coaching, Jessica fabricated complaints. Favoritism, inappropriate comments, unprofessional behavior. None of it was true. But Frank built a file. Helen watched it happening and documented every step. She knew where this was heading. The final blow came through Kyle Morrison, a 17-year-old caught cheating on his final exam. Principal Warren Hicks, Frank's loyal enforcer, gave Kyle an ultimatum. Sign a statement claiming Dr. Kowalski gave him test answers, or face expulsion and criminal charges. Kyle was terrified. He wanted to graduate. He signed the statement Frank's lawyer had written. Helen was suspended immediately, pending investigation. 28 years of exemplary service. 3 National Teacher Excellence Awards. Hundreds of students whose lives she'd changed. None of it mattered. Warren Hicks conducted the investigation, interviewing only people Frank had coached. He ignored 150 students who signed a petition defending Helen, dismissed testimony from colleagues who witnessed Frank's retaliation, accepted Kyle's coerced statement as fact. Helen's lawyer reviewed the evidence. They've rigged this completely. If you fight, they'll drag it through the media. Your reputation will be destroyed. Take the retirement package. Helen was 54 years old. She had dedicated her life to teaching, and she was being forced out by a lie. At her last staff meeting, Frank gave a speech about difficult decisions and maintaining standards. Helen sat silently, watching him perform for the assembled staff who knew exactly what he'd done. Then she stood, walked to the front of the room, and looked Frank directly in the eyes. "I know what you are," she said quietly. "One day, everyone will know." Frank's smile faltered for just a moment. Helen walked out of Lincoln High School for the last time. She was 54 years old, forced into early retirement by corruption she'd tried to expose. But Frank Garrison had made a critical mistake. He assumed destroying Helen's career would silence her. He was catastrophically wrong. Helen was supposed to start collecting her pension at $55.3,400 monthly after 28 years of service. The first check was mailed to her home address. It was never cashed. The pension office sent letters. No response. They called her phone. Disconnected. They sent a representative to her house. The neighbors said she'd moved away about a month after retirement. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Dr. Helen Kowalski had vanished. The pension accumulated, uncollected. Month after month. Year after year. After 5 years, it was flagged as unusual. After 10 years, suspicious. After 15 years, it triggered a mandatory investigation. At the 20-year mark, state auditors were required to intervene. Where was Helen Kowalski? And why hadn't she collected $816,000 in pension payments? Thomas Webb was assigned what should have been a routine case. Track down a retired teacher who never claimed her pension. Thomas was 42, methodical, and incorruptible. Qualities that made him deeply unpopular with administrators hiding financial irregularities. He pulled Helen's file and found 28 years of stellar reviews, then a sudden investigation and forced retirement. Strange. Her last known address had been sold 19 years ago. Her bank accounts closed. Her social security number unused for 2 decades. Helen Kowalski had disappeared so completely it was as if she'd never existed. Thomas interviewed former colleagues. They all said the same thing. Helen was the best teacher we ever knew. What Frank Garrison did to her was wrong. Thomas's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Thomas examined Helen's salary records from her final years of employment. Unlike other teachers whose salaries were directly deposited, Helen's went to a separate account, one that remained active for 20 years after her retirement. Thomas traced the account and found hundreds of small transactions over 2 decades. Asterisk anonymous scholarships for students. Asterisk donations to programs Frank had cut. Asterisk legal defense funds for teachers Frank retaliated against. Asterisk support for whistleblowers exposing corruption. Helen hadn't disappeared. She'd been waging a 20-year invisible war. Thomas dug deeper and discovered something extraordinary. For 20 years, anonymous evidence packages had been sent to journalists, prosecutors, and watchdog groups. Meticulously documented corruption. Financial records. Witness statements. Updated regularly with new information about Frank Garrison's embezzlement. No one had acted on them. Frank was too well connected, too politically protected. Till now. Thomas's audit had triggered something Helen had set in motion decades ago. A cascade of investigations that couldn't be stopped. FBI began investigating fraud. IRS examined tax evasion. State prosecutors reviewed embezzlement. Media finally paid attention. And Frank Garrison, 71 years old and still superintendent after 23 years, realized his empire was crumbling. Thomas requested a formal interview with Frank regarding financial irregularities and Helen Kowalski's forced retirement. Frank agreed, confident as always. He'd charmed his way out of scrutiny for 23 years. This would be no different. The interview was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. in Frank's office. Frank's secretary arrived at 8:30 a.m. to prepare. She found Frank dead at his desk. Frank Garrison was slumped over his desk, apparently dead for hours. A bottle of pills beside him. A glass of whiskey. His computer opened to emails from federal prosecutors detailing pending charges. The police ruled it suicide almost immediately. Obvious guilt. Facing prison. The shame of exposure. But Thomas wasn't convinced. The suicide note was typed, not handwritten. The pills were a prescription Frank didn't have, checked against his medical records. The whiskey glass showed signs of residue that wasn't whiskey. And Frank's computer had been accessed remotely during a 3-hour window Sunday evening, accessed by someone with administrator-level knowledge of the system. On Frank's computer, investigators found a file labeled Kowalski that hadn't been there in previous searches. Inside, a detailed confession. Frank admitted to embezzling $47 million over 23 years. Named co-conspirators: Claudia Brennan, Warren Hicks, and a dozen others. Detailed every crime, every kickback, every fraudulent contract. And he admitted to framing Dr. Helen Kowalski. She discovered my crimes and tried to report them. I destroyed her career to protect myself. I coerced a student into lying. I fabricated evidence. I ruined an innocent woman's life because she dared to speak truth. The confession ended. Dr. Kowalski told me, "One day everyone will know what you are." She was right. She's always been right. I can't face what's coming. But the confession was too perfect. Too organized. Too detailed. Almost like someone had written it for him. Federal prosecutors used Frank's confession to arrest everyone named. Claudia Brennan was taken from a city council meeting in handcuffs. Warren Hicks was arrested at school in front of students. A dozen administrators, contractors, and board members followed. The media descended. Superintendent's suicide exposes decades of corruption. The district was in chaos. Parents demanded answers. Teachers who'd been silenced for years came forward with their own stories of retaliation. And everyone asked the same question: where is Dr. Helen Kowalski? The medical examiner's final report revealed something the initial assessment missed. Frank didn't die of pill overdose. He died of a heart attack triggered by a massive dose of digitalis, a heart medication he wasn't prescribed. The digitalis was in the whiskey glass. Someone had poisoned him. Security footage from the school had been erased for a 3-hour window Sunday evening. The erasure required system administrator access, or a master key to the security office. Master keys were only given to teachers with 25+ years of service. Helen Kowalski had that key, and never turned it in. Federal agents treated it as a murder investigation now. They interviewed everyone who knew Frank, examined his movements, reviewed security footage from surrounding areas. They found nothing concrete. Helen Kowalski hadn't been seen in 20 years. No recent photographs, no credit card usage, no digital footprint. DNA on the whiskey glass was degraded, inconclusive. The poison could have been administered hours before death. Impossible to determine who had access. But they found one more piece of evidence: a handwritten letter in Frank's desk drawer. The letter was in elegant cursive on plain stationery. "Frank, you took everything from me 20 years ago. My career, my purpose, my identity. You destroyed me to hide your crimes. But you taught me an important lesson. Sometimes good people must become invisible to fight evil that's too visible. I've spent 20 years making sure your crimes would be exposed. Whether I killed you or your guilty conscience did is irrelevant. Either way, justice is served. Students you stole from will get restitution. Teachers you destroyed will be vindicated. And you will be remembered not as a successful superintendent, but as a thief who exploited children. That's my revenge. Dr. Helen Kowalski." The letter was never officially logged into evidence. It disappeared from the chain of custody. Thomas later learned that the lead FBI agent, Patricia Reyes, had been one of Helen's students 30 years ago. Patricia misfiled the letter. The trials lasted 8 months and captivated the region. Claudia Brennan was convicted of corruption, bribery, and conspiracy. 12 years in federal prison. Warren Hicks got 8 years for conspiracy, falsifying documents, and witness tampering. Jessica Talbot, the teacher who fabricated complaints against Helen, lost her teaching license permanently and faced perjury charges. The contractors who paid kickbacks received sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. But the most powerful testimony came from Kyle Morrison. Kyle Morrison was 37 now, a high school teacher himself in another district. He took the stand with tears streaming down his face. "Dr. Kowalski never gave me test answers. I cheated, got caught, and panicked. Principal Hicks told me that if I didn't sign a statement blaming Dr. Kowalski, I'd be expelled and charged criminally. He said my life would be over. Kyle's voice broke. I was 17 and terrified, so I signed the lie they wrote for me. I've lived with that guilt every single day for 20 years. Dr. Kowalski was the best teacher I ever had. She believed in students everyone else gave up on. And I destroyed her career to save my own skin. He looked directly at the camera. Dr. Kowalski, wherever you are, I'm so sorry. You deserved better. From all of us. The district was ordered to pay $47 million in restitution, recovered from seized assets and insurance settlements. The money funded asterisk scholarships for students from the years of Frank's corruption, asterisk restoration of programs that had been cut, asterisk support for teachers who'd been retaliated against, asterisk a fund for whistleblower protection. Lincoln High School was renamed Kowalski Academy for Excellence. A bronze statue of Helen was erected in front. Dr. Helen Kowalski, educator, advocate, truth-teller. But Helen never appeared to see it. Thomas tracked down Marcus Webb, the attorney who'd set up Helen's separate account 20 years ago. Marcus was 78 now, retired to Florida. He initially refused to talk, citing attorney-client privilege. Then finally admitted, Helen Kowalski came to me 20 years ago with evidence of massive corruption. She said Frank Garrison destroyed her career, and he'd destroy others unless someone stopped him. Where is she now? Thomas asked. I don't know. I haven't seen her in 15 years. She set up the account, gave me instructions for managing the funds, and disappeared. Everything ran automatically after that. What were the instructions? Continue gathering evidence. Fund anyone fighting the corruption. And when the time was right, make sure Frank Garrison couldn't escape justice. Thomas leaned forward. Did she kill him? Marcus looked at him steadily. Helen Kowalski dedicated her life to teaching right from wrong. You tell me. Despite months of investigation, no charges were filed in Frank Garrison's death. The official ruling remained suspicious death, undetermined cause. Probably murder. Possibly suicide by poison. No conclusive evidence either way. Thomas filed his final report noting that Dr. Helen Kowalski remained missing, her whereabouts unknown, but that her 20-year campaign had successfully exposed corruption and brought justice to those Frank had harmed. The pension funds, $816,000 plus interest, were placed in a trust for educational scholarships in Helen's name. Thomas assumed he'd never hear from Helen again. He was wrong. 2 years after Frank's death, Thomas received an anonymous letter postmarked from Montana with no return address. Mr. Webb, thank you for your thorough investigation. Frank Garrison's crimes are now public record. The money he stole is being returned to students. Teachers he destroyed have been vindicated. That's all I wanted. You're wondering if I killed him. The truth is, Frank Garrison died of guilt, fear, and karma. Whether I helped that process along is irrelevant. Sometimes the system fails, and good people must become the system. I spent 20 years invisible, but my work was always visible. Every scholarship, every whistleblower supported, every piece of evidence delivered. I was always there, always watching, always documenting. Tell my former students I'm proud of them. Tell future students to speak truth even when it costs everything. And tell the next corrupt administrator who thinks they can silence a teacher. We're always watching, we're always documenting, and we have all the time in the world. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice perfected. Asterisk HK. Thomas read the letter 3 times, then filed it with a smile. He knew he'd never find Helen. And honestly, he wasn't sure he wanted to. 5 years after Frank's death, Kowalski Academy had become the highest-performing school in the state. The statue of Helen stood in front of the school, and students laid flowers there before big tests, a tradition they'd started spontaneously. Former students who'd been helped by the anonymous scholarships often came back to speak about Dr. Kowalski's impact. They didn't know about the 20-year war she'd waged. They just knew she'd changed their lives. Thomas attended the 5th anniversary ceremony. Patricia Reyes, the FBI agent who'd misfiled Helen's letter, was there too. She'd retired and now taught criminal justice at the local college. They stood together watching students perform a play about integrity and courage. "Do you think she's still alive?" Thomas asked quietly. Patricia smiled. "Helen would be 79 now. She could be anywhere. Montana, Mexico, Manila. Or she could be right here, watching from the back row, invisible as always. Would you arrest her if you found her?" Patricia considered this. For what? There's no evidence she committed any crime. Just a letter that got misfiled and a corrupt man who died right before facing justice. Sometimes the universe takes care of things. That's not how the law works. No. But sometimes it's how justice works. They stood in silence, watching students who would never know the teacher who'd saved their school from the shadows. Somewhere, maybe Montana, maybe closer, Dr. Helen Kowalski was either living peacefully or had passed away quietly. Either way, her work was done. The corrupt superintendent who'd tried to silence her was dead and disgraced. His co-conspirators were in prison. The money was returned. The victims were vindicated. And Helen's legacy wasn't the revenge she took. It was the example she set. Sometimes good people lose battles. But if they're patient enough, smart enough, and committed enough, they can still win the war. The school that forced Helen into early retirement now bore her name. The superintendent who destroyed her career died in shame. The system that enabled corruption was reformed. And Helen Kowalski, wherever she was, had taught her final and most important lesson. The powerful may silence the truthful, but they cannot silence the truth. Eventually, always, the truth comes for them. And sometimes the truth has a name. Dr. Helen Kowalski. Educator. Advocate. Truth teller. And possibly, just possibly, the architect of the most patient, perfectly executed revenge in educational history. But you'd never prove it. And that was exactly how she planned it.